Hey guys, so this is the final lecture on England, right? We're looking at how England is developing their political philosophies during this chaotic era. Okay, and what we're going to find out is during this time they're going to create a social contract theory, and I do want to point out it's really secular. It's going to be based on secular beliefs, even though this guy's a devout Christian Puritan. We're going to see that a little bit later. They're going to see government as secular. And in some ways, you're going to have a separation between church and state during this time period. Really, I do believe this is where we start seeing it much more than any other time. And the two guys are going to be is Hobbes and Locke. And Locke, he's one ugly guy. I'm not sure if Hobbes is any better. But the one thing I do like about Locke is I love those hair. I wish my hair would do that, but it won't. But that's another story. All right. So we're going to look at the social contract theory of government, which is the opposite of absolutism. And you guys have already done your road group. So you should have already defined social contract theory. It is where the power of government is derived from the people. Really kind of important. Both Hobbes and Locke developed their theory based on that idea, but they're from very different contexts and very different views. So let's go ahead and get started. When we look at this, I know that's such a chaotic background. I thought that was a really cool image about how Thomas Hobbes viewed human nature. But again, that's cool. All right, so Thomas Hobbes, he publishes a book called Leviathan. And he publishes it in 1651. So what's the context in 1651 England? What has just happened, guys? What just concluded? Think about it. You know, I think I may have heard, you thought of the English Civil War. And who just got his head cut off? Yeah, Charles I. So I want to point out the context is English Civil War and the execution of the king created chaos. So I want to tell you right now, Hobbes is going to be predisposed to be against any type of revolution, which is kind of interesting because though he's Puritan, as I'll talk about it later, Oliver Cromwell couldn't stand Hobbes because this political philosophy seems to really undermine a lot that has happened. But that's the context, chaos. And what have we learned? We know political philosophies are always trying to end chaos. So he publishes Leviathan, and what does he say about human nature? It's nasty, short, brutish. I hope that's in your power map, because that kind of steps out. But I will tell you, this is a really devout Christian view. I say Puritan because, again, Puritans are Christians. Make sure you remember that. But Puritan view, this is a Christian worldview because people, think about spiritually, because life is so bad, according to Christian view, we are in need of a savior. Well, for him, he believed people were in need of both a spiritual savior, which he would say Jesus, but also a political savior he would say is a king. And again, he's just seen the king get his head cut off and chaos ensue. So again, as a devout Christian, he believes people are spiritually in need of a savior. But I also want to make sure you understand he sees it as a political savior as well. So it's a separation of church and state. Once again, I don't think the Puritans were totally excited about that. So out of all this, he develops a social contract theory. And everything I've learned in my life, I do believe Hobbes is the first guy to put forth this. The social contract theory is the opposite of the divine right theory. Remember, the divine right theory basically says that the king is derived by God, so therefore he can do whatever the heck he wants. He has that, remember, I introduced the word yesterday, arbitrary power. He's above the law. He does not have to give reasons of why he does what he does when he does. Well, the social contract theory says, no, that's not true. At least because of God. And what he says is, in the chaos of nature, people agreed to surrender all of their rights to a king. And I won't lie to you, I know he studied Bowden. This comes from Bowden, very similarly to Bowden. He is going to think that basically this is a paternalistic, if you remember that word, a paternalistic view of government, because the king beholds because we allow them to hold all these rights. So what will happen during this time period is the king can bestow rights when things are good, But in chaos, the king needs to take our rights away. And I do believe that in some ways he's justifying some of Charles I's actions, which I do think is a little crazy because of the context. Thomas Hobbes absolutely could find himself on the chopping block, but he's not. But in his conclusion, he believes the social contract theory created an absolute monarch to bring stability, that we, in the need of saving, we are going to select a man, a king, to oversee that, and that the king always knows what's best for society. And he would argue once it's established, it's set forever. The social contract theory, it's a one thing. Once you establish it, therefore. So in conclusion, he is never going to support a revolution. He's never going to support a revolution. So this book, Leviathan, is really in some ways to undermine the English Civil War, proving that the English Civil War with the beating of the king creates chaos. And he's actually putting it out there going, if Charles was still here, we'd be better off. So I do want to make sure you understand that. This is the original cover of Leviathan. I think there's some cool stuff. I know some of you guys are visual people, and if you want to click on this, I have the PowerPoint where here you can actually see the whole one. I just thought it was kind of cool to see the kind of rip. But remember, we've seen this. We see the idea. The king is almost like God overseeing society. He rules with might and justice, and that's going to be the idea. And there's some other issue, other imagery that you can look up to see. But again, Leviathan. Thomas Hobbes believed the power of government derives from the people. The people were in the chaos of nature. Their lives were short, brutish, and they decided to civilize. And in civilizing, they surrendered all of their rights to their absolute monarch. And then during good times, the king can bestow rights, but during chaos, he has the right to take them away. That's that view. That's the social contract of government, at least from an absolute point of view. Well, John Locke's Two Treatises on Government is very different. It's still a social contract theory, so there is commonality, of course, but there's so much differences here. And I would argue it's really because of context. He publishes it in 1689 to justify which event? We see the image. Yeah, to justify the Glorious Revolution. Because remember, they had not just got rid of a king, which they could, but they skipped over the son who never was king. So John Locke was called on Parliament to go justify the Glorious Revolution. I hope you've written that down. To justify the Glorious Revolution. And remember, the context is the Glorious Revolution. It's a peaceful transition of power. Fun fact, James II actually was captured when he escaped the palace when this was happening. And one of the political military leaders looked at the guy who captured him and goes, "Why did you do that? Let him go." And they let him go. And James II jumps on a boat and goes to France. Not a surprise, which we know. But again, that's another fun fact. But it's about the peaceful context. Is John Locke trying to gain stability? No. Is there chaos? No. So this political philosophy will be uniquely different than the previous ones, right? Think about that. We talked about Bodin in the context of the French Wars of Religion. We talked about Machiavelli during the Italian Wars, and we see Hobbes developing in the mix. So if we have a political philosophy that's developed outside, it's going to be less chaotic. And not surprisingly, John Locke's view is about human nature is to be cooperative and happy, that we're joyful, that when we came in, he has a secularist viewpoint. Remember? So it's almost like he has a humanist. I probably should have wrote that. I like that. It's a humanist viewpoint. He believes that humans are in the state of nature are good. They don't need a savior. They believe that people were sovereign beings or independent, that human beings and the animalistic form could rationally develop a government. So in that, he develops a social contract theory that's starkly different from Hobbes. Despite the commonality about, they both are talking about human nature, which is very different, despite the idea about the social contract deriving from the people, in the end, it's uniquely different. He believes in the state of government, in the state of nature, people chose to establish a government to ensure stability. So they're choosing their government. The people surrendered their political rights so the government could protect their natural rights. Remember, their political rights would be like the right for justice. If a truck runs me over and I die, my family does not have the right to go run over him and to kill him. They rely on the government for that. We as human individuals, we don't declare foreign policy. We rely on the government for that. We rely on the government to create laws. Those are the political rules, because we believe, based on the social contract theory, that the government exists to create laws, to set parameters for society. As long as it just is our political rights, it's totally cool. And what are our natural rights? Life, liberty, and property. And if you said pursuit of happiness, you probably didn't power mat well, because that's Thomas Jefferson. But he believes life, liberty, and property. We have the right to have life. The liberty, which we talked about, that ill-defined word, but what the liberty looks like with Parliament, and property. We have the right to own property. Not that the government's going to give us property, but if we own property, we have the right to have it. Not surprisingly, he is coming from the burghers, right? The idea of ownership, but that's kind of a cool thing. So we look at these ideas. But listen, once the government infringed upon natural rights, the people were compelled to rebel. So the government has to protect our natural rights, life, liberty, and property. Once the government infringes upon that, we have the right to rebel. And I would even say, when you're compelled, you're forced to rebel. So in the conclusion of that, he was concluding that in reality, it was not the people who rebelled. They didn't choose rebellion. James II, his infringing upon the natural rights of England, forced this. So therefore, it's not the people's fault, but James. So therefore, the Glorious Revolution is justified. And I found this a quick little cheat sheet for you guys that kind of talks about the state of nature between Hobbes and Locke. And I always, if I were you, I always kind of use this Google thing. You may have heard of it. I'm totally teasing. But you can look at the Google thing and just kind of figure out some things, visuals, right? And I do like this. It's just a different kind of way that another teacher organized it. But again, if you find cool stuff like this, please share on the updates, and I will then put it in there. But that's that. You can look that up. But in the end, we have now finished our conversation about political philosophies,